Hello everyone, and welcome back to Snowbound Screams. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of America, places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Across these hills, rivers, and empty towns are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts. Each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. The desert highways of the American Southwest stretch like arteries across the vast landscape, connecting isolated communities and traversing some of the most unforgiving terrain on the continent. These roads have witnessed countless journeys, but some travelers never reached their destinations. Others arrived forever changed by what they encountered in the endless miles between civilization. The desert has long been a place of mystery and transformation, where the harsh environment strips away pretense and reveals what lies beneath. In the shimmering heat and oppressive silence, the boundaries between reality and something else become blurred. The stories we will explore tonight come from those who have traveled these roads and returned with accounts that defy conventional explanation. Law enforcement officials, truckers, highway workers, and ordinary travelers have all reported encounters along these desert highways that continue to haunt them. These are not tales told around campfires for entertainment, but documented experiences that have left lasting impressions on those who lived through them. The vast emptiness of the desert landscape seems to invite phenomena that cannot be easily categorized or explained away. From Route 66 to the isolated highways cutting through Nevada, New Mexico, and Arizona, these accounts share common threads despite their geographical separation. They speak of isolation, of being watched, of encounters with things that should not exist. Most disturbingly, they suggest that the desert itself may be something more than just barren land, that it might be a threshold to places we cannot comprehend. What follows are 7 verified accounts from those who have experienced the desert's darker side. Each story has been cross-referenced with official reports, witness testimony, and documented evidence. The names have been changed in some cases to protect privacy, but the events themselves remain exactly as they were reported. Now, let us begin with our first story. It was late October of 2012 when trucker Marcus Thorne began what should have been a routine haul along Route 66 between Kingman and Seligman, Arizona. The 52-year-old long-haul driver had covered this particular stretch of desert highway more times than he could count over his 20-year career. The 78-mile journey typically took just over an hour in his 18-wheeler, loaded with auto parts bound for a distribution center in Flagstaff. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple, Marcus settled in for another uneventful drive. The familiar hum of his diesel engine and the rhythmic contact of tires on asphalt had long become a sort of meditation for him, a reliable constant in a life of changing routes and schedules. The desert night descended quickly, as it always does in the Southwest, bringing with it a dramatic drop in temperature. Marcus switched on his headlights, cutting through the gathering darkness with twin beams that illuminated the empty road ahead. Traffic had thinned to almost nothing, as expected for a Tuesday evening on this less-traveled portion of the historic highway. He reached for his thermos of coffee, the warmth of the container a small comfort against the growing chill. The radio was tuned to his usual station, a classic country broadcast out of Flagstaff that faded in and out with the terrain. The music crackled as he passed through a particularly desolate stretch known as the Aubrey Valley, a 30-mile expanse with no services and minimal population. It was here, surrounded by nothing but desert vegetation and distant mesas, that something began to change. The music on his radio suddenly cut out, replaced by static. Marcus frowned, reaching to adjust the dial, but found that all stations were consumed by the same crackling white noise. He tried the CB radio, hoping to connect with other truckers on the road, but it too was dead. save for the same persistent static. This was unusual. Even in the most remote areas, he could typically pick up at least one distant station or connect with the trucking community via the CB. As he continued driving, the static began to change in character, developing a rhythmic quality that almost resembled speech, though no words could be distinguished. Marcus felt the first prickle of unease along his arms, a sensation he hadn't experienced in all his years on the road. The desert outside seemed darker somehow, the usual silhouettes of cacti and rock formations appearing more menacing in the intermittent glow of his headlights. What happened next would remain with Marcus for the rest of his life, a moment that defied all his experience and understanding of the natural world. The static in his radio suddenly resolved into a clear, resonant voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Turn back," it said, the words devoid of emotion, yet carrying an authority that sent a chill down Marcus's spine. "There is nothing ahead for you." His foot instinctively eased off the accelerator as his eyes scanned the darkness beyond his headlights. The voice continued, now speaking in what sounded like a series of coordinates and technical specifications that meant nothing to him. The temperature inside the cab dropped dramatically. His breath visible in the sudden cold, Marcus gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white as the voice in his radio began to describe details of his life. His childhood in Tennessee, his daughter's recent graduation, the specific medical condition that had kept his wife hospitalized last winter. These were not things that could be found in his trucking paperwork or known to random strangers. The 18-wheeler began to slow, despite Marcus's pressure on the accelerator. The engine's familiar hum had changed to a low, guttural vibration that seemed to resonate through the entire vehicle. Through the windshield, Marcus saw something that made his heart stop. A figure standing in the middle of the highway, impossibly tall and thin, with proportions that were not quite human. It was illuminated by a pale glow that seemed to emanate from the figure itself rather than from his headlights. As he neared, the figure raised an arm, not in a threatening gesture, but as if signaling. The radio voice spoke again. "The road ahead is closed. Turn back now." Marcus found himself obeying, swinging the massive truck into a careful U-turn that should have been impossible on the narrow highway. The last thing he saw in his rearview mirror was the figure standing motionless in the middle of the road, bathed in that strange luminescence. The drive back to Kingman passed in a blur. The radio remained silent, and the temperature in the cab gradually returned to normal. Marcus didn't stop until he reached a well-lit truck stop on the edge of town, where he sat shaking for nearly an hour before he could gather himself enough to call dispatch. When he reported what had happened, he was met with skepticism, but also concern. Several other drivers had made similar reports about that stretch of highway over the years, though none had been as detailed as Marcus's account. The following day, a highway patrol inspection of the area where Marcus had turned around found nothing unusual. No footprints, no signs of any vehicle besides his own tire tracks, and certainly no explanation for the radio phenomenon or the figure he had described. Marcus filed an official report with both his company and local law enforcement. But the incident was ultimately classified as unexplained phenomena. Marcus never drove that section of Route 66 again, requesting reassignment to different routes whenever possible. The experience left him with a persistent case of insomnia and a newfound respect for the mysteries that the desert conceals. Other truckers who heard his story either dismissed it as hallucination brought on by fatigue or nodded with knowing looks, sharing their own tales of strange encounters on desert highways. The company dispatcher who took Marcus's call that night later told him that 3 other drivers had reported similar radio anomalies in that area over the past decade, though none had encountered the figure or experienced the personal details that Marcus had heard. The section of highway where Marcus turned around remains officially unremarkable. A 30-mile stretch of asphalt surrounded by nothing but desert. Yet those who know the stories drive through it with a heightened awareness of just how alone they truly are in that vast emptiness. No trace of the mysterious figure or explanation for the voice in the radio was ever found. It was mid-July of 2015 when the Peterson family embarked on what was supposed to be a memorable road trip through the Southwest. Mark and Sarah Peterson, along with their 2 children, 12-year-old Emma and 10-year-old Noah, had planned a 10-day journey that would take them from their home in Phoenix to the Grand Canyon, then through Monument Valley, and finally to Albuquerque before returning home. The family had packed their SUV with camping gear, snacks, and entertainment devices for the kids, setting out early on a Saturday morning with high spirits and the promise of adventure. Their first destination was a small, family-run motel in the town of Seligman, Arizona, a stopover chosen specifically for its proximity to Route 66 and the Petersons' desire to experience a piece of classic Americana before venturing into more remote territory. The drive north from Phoenix was uneventful, filled with the usual family road trip dynamics, games of I Spy, occasional arguments over music selection, and the excited chatter of children experiencing the desert landscape for the first time. As they approached the turnoff for Seligman, Mark noticed a small sign indicating an alternative route that promised to save 20 minutes of driving time. The road, designated as County Road 25, appeared on their GPS as a viable shortcut, cutting through what looked like relatively flat desert terrain. Despite Sarah's mild hesitation, she preferred to stick to main highways when traveling with the children. Mark decided to take the detour, eager to reach their destination before dark. The turn onto County Road 25 was unassuming, a simple right turn onto a 2-lane asphalt road that disappeared into the shimmering heat of the desert. The first few miles of County Road 25 were well maintained, with occasional ranch entrances and distant views of the Hualapai Mountains. The children had dozed off in the back seat, lulled by the air conditioning and the monotony of the drive. Sarah was scrolling through photos on her phone while Mark focused on the road ahead. It was Sarah who first noticed that something seemed wrong. "How long has it been since we've seen another car?" she asked, looking up from her phone. Mark glanced at the clock. Nearly 40 minutes had passed since they'd turned off the main highway. In that time, they hadn't encountered a single vehicle, nor had they seen any signs of civilization beyond a few dilapidated fence posts. The road had gradually deteriorated, with cracks and potholes becoming increasingly common. When Mark checked their GPS, he was disturbed to find that they appeared to be driving in a circle, despite his certainty that he had maintained a straight course. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert, the Peterson situation grew increasingly unsettling. The road had narrowed to a single lane with no shoulder, flanked by dense vegetation that seemed to press in on them from both sides. Strange rock formations rose periodically from the desert floor, twisted shapes that bore an uncanny resemblance to human figures in the fading light. Emma had woken up and was now staring out the window with wide eyes. "Dad," she said quietly, "there's someone walking out there." Mark followed her gaze, but saw nothing but desert and shadows. "It's probably just a cactus, sweetie," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The family's cell phones had lost signal nearly an hour ago, and their GPS now showed them as being in a completely different part of Arizona than where they knew they must be. What happened next marked the beginning of what the Petersons would later describe but as the longest night of our lives. As darkness fell completely, the SUV's headlights revealed something standing in the middle of the road ahead. Mark slammed on the brakes, bringing the vehicle to a stop about 50 feet from the figure. It appeared to be a woman in a long dress, her back to them, standing perfectly still. When Mark honked the horn, The figure began to turn, slowly, unnaturally slowly, in a movement that seemed to violate normal human motion. Sarah screamed, grabbing the children and pulling them down in their seats. "Drive, Mark, just drive," she yelled. Mark didn't need to be told twice. He threw the SUV into reverse, backing up quickly before turning around in a three-point maneuver that scraped the vehicle's undercarriage on the rough road surface. As they sped away, Sarah looked back to see the figure still standing in the road, now facing their direction. Though in the darkness, she couldn't make out any features. The next hours were a blur of panicked driving, wrong turns, and mounting terror. Every time they thought they were heading back toward civilization, the road seemed to double back on itself, leading them deeper into the desert. At one point, they passed what looked like an abandoned gas station, its pumps and building covered in dust that seemed decades old. When Mark pulled over to check if there might be a working phone, he found the building's door hanging open, revealing shelves stocked with products and packaging that appeared to be from the 1970s. A quick exploration revealed no signs of life, no electricity, and no phone. Just an eerie silence, broken only by the wind whistling through broken windows. As they returned to their vehicle, they noticed fresh footprints in the dust, leading away from the gas station and into the desert, though they had seen no one else. The family's ordeal continued through the night, with the SUV's fuel gauge dropping toward empty as they drove endlessly through what seemed to be an ever-repeating landscape of desert vegetation and rock formations. At approximately 3:17 a.m., according to the car's clock, they saw headlights approaching from the distance. Mark flashed his high beams repeatedly, relief washing over him at the prospect of help. But as the other vehicle drew closer, they realized something was terribly wrong. The approaching truck seemed to be floating several feet above the road, its headlights arranged in an unusual pattern that didn't match any vehicle they recognized. The truck passed them without slowing, and as it went by, the Petersons could see that it made no sound, despite its apparent speed and size. In the brief illumination, they also noticed that the road surface ahead seemed to end abruptly, as if dropping off into nothingness. Morning found the Petersons on a dirt road they didn't recognize, the SUV nearly out of fuel, and the family exhausted and terrified. The rising sun revealed that they were in a valley surrounded by high cliffs, with no apparent way out except the road they had been traveling. It was Emma who first noticed the smoke curling up from behind a rocky outcropping. "Look," she said, pointing with a trembling finger. Mark drove cautiously toward the smoke, finding a small camp with two men who appeared to be ranchers. The men were initially surprised to see the family, explaining that they were nearly 30 miles from the nearest paved road and in an area rarely visited by outsiders. When Mark explained what had happened, one of the ranchers nodded slowly and asked, "Did you take County Road 25 off Route 66? At Mark's affirmative response, the man simply said, "That road's been closed for 15 years, ever since that family disappeared out there. The signs keep getting taken down." The ranchers led the Petersons to a dirt track that eventually connected with a main highway, from which they were able to reach a town where they contacted authorities. The Coconino County Sheriff's Office took their statement, but seemed unsurprised by their story, noting that they received similar reports every few years about that area. The Petersons learned that County Road 25 had officially been decommissioned in 2000 after multiple incidents of travelers becoming lost and disoriented, including one family who had vanished in 1998 and were never found. When deputies later investigated the location where the Petersons had turned around, they found no evidence of the figure Sarah had seen or the mysterious truck, though they did confirm that the abandoned gas station existed exactly as described, seemingly frozen in time. The Petersons completed their vacation, but avoided all remote roads. returning home with a story that would haunt their family for years to come. The official incident report remains on file with the Coconino County Sheriff's Office, classified under Unexplained Phenomena, with a note that the area continues to be a source of unusual reports despite being officially closed to traffic. No explanation for what the Petersons experienced that night was ever found. It was early November of 2018 when Arizona Highway Patrol Officer David Rodriguez began what should have been a routine night shift. The 34-year-old officer had been with the Arizona Department of Public Safety for 8 years, working primarily out of the Kingman station that covered a vast stretch of northwestern Arizona, including long, desolate sections of I-40, US 93, and numerous state routes that crisscrossed the high desert. That evening, as the sun set behind the rugged Hualapai Mountains, Rodriguez attended his shift briefing, received his patrol vehicle, a 2017 Ford Police Interceptor SUV, and began his familiar route along I-40 toward the California border. The weather was unseasonably cold, with temperatures already dropping into the low 40s as darkness fell, and a light wind carried the promise of winter across the desert floor. The first 3 hours of Rodriguez's shift passed uneventfully, consisting of routine traffic stops, assistance to a motorist with a flat tire, and a high-speed pursuit that ended when the suspect's vehicle ran out of gas near the Yucca exit. As midnight approached, dispatch sent him to investigate a report of a disabled vehicle on the south shoulder of I-40, approximately 20 miles east of the town of Seligman. The caller had reported seeing a car with its hazard lights flashing, though they hadn't stopped to check on the occupants due to the isolated location and late hour. Rodriguez acknowledged the call, noting in his log that he was familiar with that particular stretch of highway, a desolate area with no services for miles in either direction, flanked by the Prescott National Forest to the south and open desert to the north. As he drove, he reviewed the limited information available. A silver sedan, possibly a Toyota, last seen near mile marker 123. When Rodriguez arrived at the reported location, he found the vehicle exactly as described. A silver Toyota Camry parked partially on the shoulder, its hazard lights still blinking rhythmically in the darkness. The car appeared undamaged, with no signs of a collision or mechanical failure. As Rodriguez approached with his flashlight, he noted that the driver's side door was slightly ajar, though the engine was off and the vehicle empty. A quick search of the immediate area revealed no sign of the driver or any passengers. Rodriguez ran the license plate through his system, discovering that the car was registered to a Jennifer Walsh of Phoenix, with no outstanding warrants or alerts associated with the vehicle. He contacted dispatch to report his findings and was informed that Ms. Walsh had been reported missing by her husband earlier that evening, when she failed to arrive at their daughter's college in Flagstaff as planned. Rodriguez began a more thorough investigation of the scene, documenting everything with his body camera and taking photographs for the official report. The desert night was utterly silent, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of the Camry's hazard lights and the distant hum of his patrol vehicle's engine. As he examined the car's interior, Rodriguez noticed something unusual. The driver's seat was positioned unusually far forward, as if someone much shorter than the average adult had been driving. The GPS showed a route that didn't make sense, taking the driver far south of the direct route to Flagstaff and into remote Forest Service roads. More disturbingly, Rodriguez found a child's stuffed animal, a small gray rabbit, lying on the passenger seat floor, its fur matted as if it had been wet and then dried. There was no child car seat in the vehicle, nor any indication that a child had been traveling with Ms. Walsh, according to the missing person report. What happened next would become one of the most baffling cases in Rodriguez's career, and would ultimately lead to his request for a transfer away from night patrol in that district. As he was completing his documentation, Rodriguez heard a sound that made him freeze, a soft tapping coming from inside the trunk of the Camry. He immediately drew his service weapon, calling out to whoever might be inside. When there was no response, only another series of soft, rhythmic taps. Rodriguez carefully approached the trunk, his flashlight beam steady on the lock mechanism. The tapping continued, now accompanied by what sounded like a child's faint whisper, though the words were indistinguishable. Rodriguez called for backup, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. While waiting for the other officers to arrive, he circled the vehicle several times, finding no signs of forced entry or damage that might explain how someone could be trapped inside without setting off the car's alarm system. When 2 additional patrol units arrived approximately 20 minutes later, Rodriguez and his colleagues decided to open the trunk, preparing for various scenarios, including a possible abduction or a child in distress. The trunk opened easily, revealing nothing but a spare tire, jack, and the usual emergency equipment. There was no one inside, nor any indication that anyone had recently been there. The officers searched the surrounding area thoroughly, using flashlights and thermal imaging equipment, but found nothing beyond desert vegetation and rocky terrain. The tapping sound had ceased the moment the trunk was opened, and despite their continued presence at the scene for another hour, it did not resume. Rodriguez documented everything meticulously, though he knew the official report would struggle to explain what he and his fellow officers had heard that night. The investigation into Jennifer Walsh's disappearance would continue for months, eventually becoming a cold case with no resolution. The Camry was processed for evidence, yielding only Miss Walsh's fingerprints and those of her husband, who had been cleared of any suspicion. The stuffed animal was sent for analysis, but revealed only DNA matching Jennifer Walsh, with no indication of a child's presence. Multiple search parties combed the area where the car was abandoned, including cadaver dogs and helicopter teams, but found no trace of Miss Walsh or any evidence of foul play. The most perplexing element remained the sounds Rodriguez and his colleagues had heard from the trunk, a phenomenon that none could explain and that would haunt the officers involved. Rodriguez himself experienced what he could only describe as auditory hallucinations for weeks after the incident, occasionally hearing faint tapping when his patrol car was parked in isolated locations. 6 months after the incident, Rodriguez requested and received a transfer to the department's Criminal Investigations Division, citing a desire to focus on solving cases rather than patrol work. In private conversations with his supervisor, he admitted that the experience with the Camry had shaken his fundamental understanding of reality and made him question his ability to remain objective during isolated night patrols. The case of Jennifer Walsh remains open with the Arizona Department of Public Safety, listed as a missing person investigation with no known suspects or leads. The Camry was eventually returned to her husband, who sold it to a dealership in Phoenix. Rodriguez never learned who purchased the vehicle afterward, though he sometimes wondered if its new owner experienced anything unusual during desert drives. The tapping sound he heard that night has never been adequately explained, though Rodriguez would occasionally discuss it with other officers who had similar, unexplained experiences in that particular stretch of desert highway. No trace of Jennifer Walsh was ever found. It was late August of 2016 when maintenance worker Hector Mendoza discovered something that would trouble him for years to come. The 48-year-old Arizona Department of Transportation employee had worked the same route for over a decade, responsible for rest areas and pull-offs along a 150-mile stretch of US 60 between Wickenburg and the New Mexico border. The job was mostly routine, checking restrooms, cleaning picnic areas, removing litter, and reporting any maintenance issues that required specialized attention. That particular Tuesday morning found Hector at the Quail Springs Rest Area, a small facility located approximately 40 miles east of Salome, in one of the most desolate stretches of his route. The rest area consisted of 2 small buildings, a handful of picnic tables, and a single information kiosk, all surrounded by desert vegetation that seemed to press in on the facility from all sides. Hector arrived at Quail Springs just after 9 a.m., beginning his routine inspection with the men's restroom building. Everything appeared normal until he entered the larger of the 2 structures, a combination visitor center and restroom facility that had been constructed in the early 1990s. As he cleaned, Hector noticed that one of the trash receptacles contained something unusual: a small digital voice recorder, similar to those used by journalists or students. The device was an older model, a Sony ICD-BX140 that showed signs of considerable wear, with scratches on the casing and a partially faded battery cover. Out of curiosity rather than any sense of duty, Hector pressed the play button after discovering that the device still had power. What he heard would make him immediately call his supervisor and ultimately involve state law enforcement in an investigation that would yield more questions than answers. The recording began with what sounded like a car door closing, followed by footsteps on gravel. A man's voice, somewhat breathless, as if from exertion, spoke first. "Okay, I'm here. It's just after midnight, I think. The car died about a mile back. No cell service, of course. Figured I'd walk to this rest area, maybe find a map or something." There was a pause, then the sound of wind whistling across the microphone. The man continued. "This place is creepier than I expected. All the lights are out, even the emergency ones. Hello? Is anyone here?" The recording captured the sound of the man's footsteps echoing slightly as he walked. Then a sudden gasp. What was that? Sounded like a voice, but not human. More like, I don't know, a bird call, but deeper. "Hello?" Another pause, during which only the wind could be heard. "I'm going to check the buildings. Maybe there's an emergency phone or something." Hector listened with growing unease as the recording continued, documenting what appeared to be the man's exploration of the darkened rest area. The audio captured sounds of doors being opened, the man's footsteps echoing in what seemed to be empty rooms, and his increasingly nervous commentary about his surroundings. The women's restroom door was unlocked. No one inside, but something's weird here. All the mirrors are covered with what looks like newspaper. Why would someone do that? The recording then captured a sudden, sharp sound that made Hector jump, a loud bang followed by what sounded like shattering glass. The man on the recording swore, then said, "That came from the men's side. I'm not going over there. I think I'll just wait in my car until morning. Except my car is dead. Right? Okay. New plan." The sound of the man's breathing grew heavier, more rapid, as if he were becoming increasingly anxious. What followed on the recording was what prompted Hector to call his supervisor and ultimately preserve the device as evidence. After several minutes of relative silence, broken only by wind and the man's occasional nervous muttering, a new sound emerged. What appeared to be a child's laughter, though it had an odd quality to it, as if it were being played at the wrong speed. The man on the recording reacted with alarm. "Who's there?" "I can hear you laughing. This isn't funny. Are you kids out here causing trouble?" The laughter continued, now joined by what sounded like footsteps running in the distance, though the acoustics made it difficult to determine direction. The man's voice grew more desperate. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I'm just stranded here. My car broke down. If you could give me a ride to the next town, I'd really appreciate it. Please?" The only response was more laughter, now seeming to come from multiple directions at once. The recording took an even more unsettling turn in its final minutes. The man on the recording began to cry softly, his breathing ragged with fear. "Please leave me alone. he whispered. "Whatever you are, just leave me alone." A new voice then spoke, not the child's laughter, but something deeper, resonant, and seemingly genderless. It said only 3 words. "You shouldn't have come." This was followed by what sounded like a struggle. Grunts, the sound of something being knocked over, and finally a scream that cut off abruptly. After several seconds of silence, the recording captured what sounded like footsteps moving away from the microphone. Then nothing more, until the device's battery apparently died. The total recording time was 27 minutes and 43 seconds. Hector's supervisor, Regional Maintenance Manager Robert Jenkins, arrived at the rest area approximately 45 minutes after receiving Hector's call. Jenkins listened to the recording in its entirety, his expression growing increasingly grim as the audio progressed. "We need to call this in," he said when the recording ended. Right now, both men noticed that the rest area seemed perfectly normal in the daylight. No signs of struggle, no broken glass, no covered mirrors, and certainly no explanation for the voices captured on the device. The Quail Springs rest area had no history of unusual incidents beyond occasional vandalism, and nothing in the maintenance log suggested any problems with the facility. When questioned by the responding sheriff's deputy, both men insisted that what they had heard on the recording was genuine and deeply disturbing. The investigation that followed would uncover a series of unsettling coincidences and unexplained phenomena. The digital voice recorder was taken into evidence by the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, where forensic analysts confirmed that the recording was authentic and had not been tampered with or edited. The device's serial number revealed that it had been purchased from a Phoenix electronics store in 2014, though the store had no record of the buyer beyond a cash transaction. Most disturbingly, a check of missing person reports revealed that a 29-year-old freelance journalist named Daniel Reeves had been reported missing by his family exactly 1 week before Hector discovered the recorder. Reeves had been working on a story about urban legends and mysterious places along Arizona's highways, with his research focusing specifically on rest areas and pull-offs with strange reputations. Further investigation revealed that Daniel Reeves's car had been found abandoned on the shoulder of US 60, approximately 1 mile west of the Quail Springs rest area, exactly as described in the recording. The vehicle had run out of fuel. Though Reeves's family insisted that he was meticulous about planning his trips and would never have allowed himself to run out of gas in such a remote location. A search of Reeves's apartment uncovered research notes on various Arizona rest areas, with extensive files on Quail Springs specifically. According to local legend, which Reeves had documented from multiple sources, the rest area was rumored to be a place where travelers sometimes disappeared, though no official reports confirmed such occurrences. The most chilling discovery was a partial entry in Reeves's journal, dated the day he went missing. Quail Springs tonight. The stories say it's most active between midnight and 3 a.m. Going to find out what's really happening there. Despite an extensive search of the area around the rest area, including the use of cadaver dogs and aerial surveys, no trace of Daniel Reeves was ever found. The Maricopa County Sheriff's Office officially classified his case as a missing person investigation, though privately, some of the officers involved admitted to being deeply troubled by the recording and the circumstances surrounding Reeves's disappearance. The Quail Springs rest area remained open, with no additional incidents reported in the years following the discovery of the recorder. Hector Mendoza eventually requested a transfer to a different maintenance route, citing personal reasons, though he would later admit to friends and family that he could never again feel comfortable at Quail Springs, especially during his early morning rounds when he arrived before sunrise. The digital voice recorder remained in police evidence, its last 27 minutes serving as a disturbing testament to something that defied explanation in the Arizona desert. No trace of Daniel Reeves was ever found. It was early March of 2017 when Arizona Department of Transportation Maintenance Crew Supervisor Frank Castillo experienced something that would challenge his pragmatic view of the world. The 56-year-old civil engineer had worked for ADOT for nearly 3 decades, spending the last 15 years overseeing road maintenance and construction projects across northwestern Arizona. That particular week found Frank and his crew working on a resurfacing project along State Route 95, a north-south highway that runs parallel to the Colorado River between Yuma and Lake Havasu City. The project required night work to minimize traffic disruption, meaning Frank's crew of 8 workers would be active from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., taking advantage of the desert's cooler nighttime temperatures and the reduced traffic flow along the primarily rural route. The work was progressing according to schedule, with the crew operating heavy machinery to remove the old asphalt surface, while others prepared the foundation for the new pavement. Frank moved between the different work zones, checking progress and ensuring that all safety protocols were being followed. The night was clear and unusually cold for early March in the desert, with temperatures dropping into the low 50s as a cold front moved through the region. Frank noted the exceptional visibility. The sky above was a canvas of stars, seemingly brighter and more numerous than usual due to the lack of light pollution in this remote area. The crew worked under portable floodlights that created islands of brilliant illumination along the dark highway, their engine noise and the sounds of construction echoing across the quiet desert landscape. At approximately 2:30 a.m., Frank was conferring with the asphalt plant operator via radio regarding the timing of the next material delivery when he noticed something unusual in the sky. At first, he dismissed it as an aircraft from the nearby Marine Corps Air Station Yuma, or perhaps a commercial flight passing overhead at high altitude. But as he continued to observe, he realized that what he was seeing didn't correspond to any conventional aircraft. 3 lights were arranged in a perfect triangular formation, moving silently across the sky in a way that no known aircraft could achieve, changing direction abruptly without banking or slowing, maintaining perfect formation regardless of their movements. The lights themselves were unusual as well, not the steady beams of aircraft navigation lights, but pulsating orbs that shifted in color, from white to blue to red in a synchronized pattern. Frank called over 2 of his crew members, Miguel Hernandez and Tom Wilson, both of whom witnessed the phenomenon. "What the hell is that?" Tom asked, his usual skepticism replaced by genuine bewilderment. Miguel crossed himself, a gesture Frank had seen him make only once before during a near-miss accident on a previous project. The 3 men watched as the lights performed maneuvers that defied the laws of physics, as Frank understood them. Sudden stops, instantaneous changes in direction, and movements that seemed to bend rather than cut through the sky. What happened next would become the subject of extensive documentation and investigation. The 3 lights suddenly separated, each moving to a different position above the desert before descending slowly toward the ground. Maintaining their triangular formation, but now oriented horizontally rather than vertically. Frank immediately contacted the Mojave County Sheriff's Office non-emergency line, reporting what he and his crew were witnessing. The dispatcher who took his call, Lisa Peterson, later testified that she initially thought Frank might be intoxicated or mistaken until she received 3 additional calls within the next 10 minutes, reporting similar phenomena from different locations along Route 95. As Frank continued to observe the lights, he noticed that they were now hovering approximately half a mile from the work site, at an altitude of what appeared to be 200-300 feet above the desert floor. The lights cast a pale blue illumination on the ground beneath them, creating 3 distinct circles that revealed details of the desert terrain not visible in the darkness. Through binoculars, Frank thought he could see something within each light, a darker shape or structure. But the details remained indistinct. What occurred over the next hour would become one of the most well-documented UFO encounters in Arizona history. Witnessed by multiple people across a 50-mile stretch of desert highway, Frank and his crew watched as the three lights began to move in a coordinated pattern, sometimes forming a straight line, sometimes returning to the triangular formation, occasionally moving independently before rejoining the group. At one point, one of the lights descended lower than the others, appearing to touch the desert floor before rising again to rejoin the formation. Throughout this display, the lights made no sound detectable to Frank or his crew, despite their apparent proximity and size. The work site had fallen silent as all 8 crew members now watched the phenomenon, their construction tasks temporarily forgotten in the face of something extraordinary. The encounter reached its climax when one of the lights suddenly detached from the formation and began moving directly toward the work site. Frank ordered his crew to gather near the equipment, both for safety and perhaps some unconscious need for solidarity in the face of the unknown. The approaching light moved slowly but deliberately, descending as it came closer until it was hovering approximately 500 feet from where the workers stood. Its illumination was now intense enough to cast shadows, revealing details of the construction equipment and the workers' faces in stark relief. Through binoculars, Frank could now see that the light contained what appeared to be a hoplite structure of some kind, though its shape was difficult to determine due to the brilliant illumination that surrounded it. The object remained in this position for approximately 5 minutes before ascending rapidly and rejoining the other 2 lights, which had maintained their position during this encounter. The lights remained visible for another 30 minutes, continuing their strange aerial maneuvers before gradually ascending and disappearing from view. Frank immediately documented everything he had witnessed, writing detailed notes and sketching the movements and formations he had observed. He also collected written statements from all 8 crew members, each describing what they had seen in their own words. The Mojave County Sheriff's Office dispatched Deputy Mark Reynolds to investigate. Arriving at the work site at approximately 4:30 a.m., Reynolds interviewed all witnesses and examined the site, though he found no physical evidence of the encounter beyond the disturbed earth and construction materials that were part of the road project. The deputy's official report noted the consistency between witness statements and the credibility of the observers, all of whom had spotless records and no apparent motive for fabricating such an account. The following days brought additional reports from other witnesses who had observed the lights from different locations along Route 95, including a truck driver, a highway patrol officer, and residents of several small communities in the area. The Federal Aviation Administration conducted an investigation, but could not identify any conventional aircraft that matched the descriptions or flight characteristics reported by witnesses. Luke Air Force Base initially denied having any aircraft in the area, but later confirmed that no military exercises had been conducted on that date or time that could explain the phenomenon. The incident received extensive media coverage, with Frank becoming an unwilling spokesperson for what many were calling the Route 95 incident. Frank Castillo's experience changed him in subtle but profound ways. The pragmatic engineer who had spent his career dealing with concrete facts and measurable phenomena found himself contemplating possibilities he had previously dismissed. He cooperated fully with investigators from various organizations, including private UFO research groups, though he maintained a cautious and factual approach to describing what he had witnessed. The construction project continued without further incident, though Frank noted that his crew worked with a new sense of awareness, frequently glancing at the night sky during their shifts. The official investigation by the Mojave County Sheriff's Office remained open, classified as unidentified aerial phenomena, with no final explanation ever provided for what Frank and his crew had witnessed that night. No physical evidence of the lights was ever found, beyond the consistent testimony of multiple credible witnesses across a large area of desert highway. It was early June of 2014 when recent college graduate Jenna Cooper began what should have been a celebratory cross-country drive from Los Angeles to her parents' home in Chicago. The 22-year-old had just completed her master's degree in anthropology at UCLA and decided to treat herself to a road trip along historic Route 66, following the path of countless travelers before her. Her 2008 Honda Civic was packed with camping gear, clothes, and a collection of mixed CDs from friends who couldn't join her on the journey. The first leg of her trip took her through the California desert, with planned stops in Barstow, Needles, and Kingman, before continuing eastward. Jenna was an experienced solo traveler, having backpacked through Europe the previous summer, and felt confident in her ability to handle whatever challenges the road might present. The California portion of Jenna's journey passed without incident, though she noted the increasing isolation as she moved deeper into the Mojave Desert. By the time she crossed into Arizona, the summer heat had become intense, with temperatures well over 100 degrees, despite it being only early June. The historic Route 66 had long been replaced by Interstate 40 as the main east-west thoroughfare. But Jenna had deliberately chosen the older road, seeking the authentic experience and the opportunity to explore the small towns and roadside attractions that had made the highway famous. She spent her first night in Kingman, exploring the historic downtown area and visiting the Route 66 Museum, where she learned about the highway's storied past and the travelers who had made it legendary. The museum's exhibits on the Dust Bowl migration and the highway's mid-century heyday fascinated Jenna, though she noted that many of the displays mentioned the darker side of cross-country travel, the disappearances, accidents, and mysterious encounters that had occurred along the route. Jenna's second day on the road began early, as she wanted to cover as much distance as possible before the desert heat reached its peak. She stopped in Seligman for breakfast at a famous roadside diner, where the waitress warned her about cell service becoming increasingly unreliable as she continued east. "You'll be lucky to get a signal at all once you pass Ash Fork," the middle-aged woman said, refilling Jenna's coffee cup. "The desert doesn't like technology out there. Something about the minerals in the ground, or so they say." Jenna thanked her for the advice, though she didn't think much of it at the time. As she continued her journey, the landscape grew increasingly desolate, with long stretches between services and few other vehicles on the road. The summer heat created a shimmering effect on the asphalt ahead, making the highway appear to disappear and reappear like a mirage. It was approximately 3:30 p.m. when Jenna saw the figure standing by the side of the road, thumb outstretched in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker. The young woman appeared to be in her early 20s, dressed in faded jeans and a simple white t-shirt with a backpack at her feet. Her long dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she shielded her eyes from the sun with one hand as Jenna's car approached. Jenna hesitated. Her parents had always warned her against picking up strangers, but something about the woman's appearance seemed harmless, and Jenna knew that this stretch of road offered few alternatives for someone who needed a ride. After checking her rearview mirror and seeing no other vehicles for miles in either direction, Jenna made the decision to stop, pulling onto the gravel shoulder about 20 feet ahead of where the woman stood. The hitchhiker approached the passenger side door, her movements smooth and economical despite the heat. When Jenna leaned over to unlock the door, the woman offered a grateful smile. "Thanks so much for stopping," she said, her voice pleasant but somewhat distant. "I've been out here for a while." As the woman settled into the passenger seat, Jenna noticed several unusual things about her appearance. Her clothing, though simple, appeared strangely pristine for someone who had supposedly been walking in the desert heat. No sweat stains, no dust, no signs of exertion. Her backpack looked brand new, with tags still attached to one of the straps. Most unusual were her shoes, expensive-looking hiking boots that appeared to have never been worn, their soles clean and unscuffed. Jenna dismissed these observations as her anthropologist's tendency to overanalyze details, engaging her passenger in conversation as she pulled back onto the highway. The young woman introduced herself as Maria, explaining that she was traveling from Flagstaff to meet friends in Albuquerque, but had been abandoned by her previous ride after an argument. "He just got weird," Maria said, staring out the window at the passing desert. "Started asking personal questions, you know. So I asked him to let me out." Jenna nodded sympathetically, though she found Maria's story somewhat vague. As they continued driving, Jenna attempted to make conversation, asking about Maria's studies, interests, and travel plans. The responses she received were minimal and somewhat evasive, with Maria often changing the subject or answering questions with questions of her own. "Why are you traveling this road?" Maria asked, turning to face Jenna with an intensity that made the driver uncomfortable. "There are faster ways to get across the country." What happened next would become the most terrifying experience of Jenna's life. A journey into the uncanny that would ultimately lead to police involvement and an official investigation. As they approached a desolate stretch known as the Aubrey Cliffs, Maria suddenly became agitated, pointing at something in the distance. "Stop the car," she said, her voice suddenly cold and commanding. "Right here." Jenna, startled by the change in tone, pulled onto the shoulder without question. Maria turned to face her directly, her eyes seeming to change color in the shifting desert light. "You need to turn around," she said. "This road isn't safe for you. Not anymore." When Jenna asked what she meant, Maria's response sent a chill down her spine. Some roads collect stories. Some roads collect people. This one does both. Jenna felt a wave of fear so intense that it made her physically ill. Maria's appearance seemed to shift subtly, her features becoming less distinct, as if Jenna were looking at a photograph that had been slightly out of focus. The temperature inside the car dropped dramatically, despite the afternoon heat outside. "Who are you?" Jenna asked, her voice trembling. Maria smiled, but it was a strange expression that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm the warning," she said. "I'm the one who tells people to turn back before it's too late." With that, she opened the car door and stepped out onto the shoulder. Jenna watched in horror as Maria walked away from the car, not toward the desert, but directly into the side of a rocky outcropping, disappearing as if she had walked through a doorway rather than solid rock. Jenna sat frozen for several minutes, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. When she finally gathered herself enough to drive, she sped eastward, not stopping until she reached the town of Williams, where she immediately called the Coconino County Sheriff's Office. Deputy Mike Thompson took her statement, appearing somewhat skeptical but noting Jenna's genuine terror and the fact that she was obviously not under the influence of drugs or alcohol. When Thompson asked for a description of the hitchhiker, Jenna provided what details she could remember, though she struggled with the strange sense that Maria's features had become indistinct in her memory. The deputy's expression changed when Jenna mentioned the name Maria, and he excused himself for a moment to speak with someone in another office. When Thompson returned, his demeanor had shifted from professional skepticism to genuine concern. He explained that there had been multiple reports over the years of a hitchhiker matching Jenna's description along that stretch of Route 66, always identifying herself as Maria and always disappearing under mysterious circumstances. The most recent report had been filed just 3 months earlier by a truck driver who had given a ride to a young woman matching the same description. He said she walked into the side of his truck while it was moving, Thompson said, consulting his notes. just vanished. He thought he was seeing things until he talked to some other drivers who had similar experiences. The deputy showed Jenna a file containing reports dating back to the 1970s, all describing encounters with a young female hitchhiker who would disappear under impossible circumstances. The Coconino County Sheriff's Office officially documented Jenna's encounter, though the report was ultimately classified under unexplained phenomena rather than any criminal investigation. Jenna completed her journey home, though she abandoned her plans to travel Route 66, instead taking the most direct interstate route possible. The experience left her with a profound sense of unease about isolated highways and the stories they might hold. In the years that followed, she would occasionally research the phenomenon she had experienced, discovering similar legends from around the world, vanishing hitchhikers who appeared as warnings or omens. The most disturbing discovery came when she found an old newspaper article from 1968 describing the disappearance of a young woman named Maria Gonzalez, who had last been seen hitchhiking along Route 66 near the Aubrey Cliffs. No trace of Maria Gonzalez was ever found, though some might say she continues to travel that desert highway, offering warnings to those who stop to give her a ride. It was late September of 2019 when meteorology graduate student Kyle Ramirez and two of his colleagues embarked on what should have been a routine data collection trip in the Arizona desert. The 26-year-old PD candidate at the University of Arizona was studying unusual weather phenomena in the Southwest, focusing specifically on dust devils and the microclimates that formed in the valleys between mountain ranges. Accompanying Kyle were fellow students Sarah Jenkins and Marcus Chen, both working on related research projects under the same faculty advisor. Their university expedition vehicle, a specially equipped 4x4 truck with weather monitoring equipment, cameras, and communication systems, had been prepared for a 3-day journey through the remote desert regions between Tucson and the California border. The team's objective was to collect data during the transitional weather period of late September, when summer heat began to give way to autumn's more variable conditions. The first day of their expedition passed productively, with the team establishing their base camp in a remote valley approximately 50 miles southwest of Phoenix. They deployed their equipment, took initial readings, and documented the environmental conditions as the sun set behind the surrounding mountains. The evening was spent organizing data and preparing for the next day's activities, with the 3 students discussing their research goals and expectations for the expedition. As they worked, Kyle noted an unusual atmospheric reading: lower barometric pressure and higher ionization levels than would typically be expected in this area during this season. "This might be interesting," he told his colleagues, pointing to the data on his laptop. "We could be in for some unusual weather patterns." None of them could have predicted just how unusual those patterns would become. The following morning began with clear skies and rising temperatures, typical for late September in the Sonoran Desert. The team broke camp and proceeded to their next data collection site, a flat expanse of desert approximately 20 miles to the west. As they traveled, Kyle noticed that the vehicle's equipment was detecting increasingly strange atmospheric conditions, fluctuations in electromagnetic fields, unusual radio frequency interference, and periodic spikes in radiation levels that couldn't be attributed to any known natural sources. "This is really weird," Sarah commented, reviewing the data streaming to her tablet. "These readings don't match any of the models we've studied." Marcus, who was driving, pointed toward the horizon, where a strange formation of clouds was gathering despite the clear weather forecast. "I think we might be in for something more than just dust devils," he said, his voice tinged with the excitement that had drawn all 3 of them to meteorological field research. What happened next would become one of the most baffling cases in the University of Arizona's Atmospheric Sciences Department and would ultimately involve multiple law enforcement agencies. As the team approached their data collection site, They encountered a phenomenon that none of their training or experience had prepared them for. The sky ahead had grown dark despite the morning hour, with clouds moving in a circular pattern that resembled a slow-motion hurricane. What made this particularly unusual was that the clouds appeared to be rotating in opposite directions simultaneously, with the inner layer moving clockwise while the outer layer moved counterclockwise. Even more bizarre was the coloration of the clouds. Not the dark gray of storm clouds, but a strange purplish hue that seemed to pulse with internal energy. Kyle immediately contacted their faculty advisor, Dr. Eleanor Reed, via satellite phone, describing what they were witnessing. Reed, who had 30 years of experience in field meteorology, was initially skeptical until Kyle transmitted the visual data from their equipment. "I've never seen anything like this," she admitted, her voice crackling through the connection. "The rotational patterns alone defy everything we know about atmospheric dynamics. You need to document this, but be prepared to evacuate if conditions worsen." The team proceeded cautiously, setting up their monitoring equipment and beginning to collect data on the unprecedented phenomenon. As they worked, they noticed that the strange cloud formation appeared to be centered on a specific point in the desert approximately 2 miles from their position, with the rotation becoming more defined as time passed. The situation grew increasingly strange as the morning progressed. The equipment began detecting phenomena that shouldn't exist according to current scientific understanding. Gravity fluctuations, temporal distortions in their measurement equipment, and energy readings that spiked and fell in patterns that seemed almost deliberate rather than random. "This is starting to feel less like weather and more like something else," Sarah said, her usual scientific detachment replaced by a sense of wonder mixed with apprehension. Marcus pointed toward the center of the formation, where something appeared to be materializing within the clouds. A structure or object that was difficult to define, but seemed to possess geometric regularity inconsistent with natural cloud formations. The team's cameras captured images of what appeared to be a crystalline structure rotating within the cloud center, though the images were strangely distorted, as if the very act of observation was affecting the phenomenon. The climax of the encounter occurred at approximately 11:30 a.m., when the cloud formation suddenly began to contract, drawing inward toward the central point where the crystalline structure was visible. The team watched in awe and terror as the phenomenon intensified, with lightning of unusual colors, primarily green and blue, crackling between the cloud layers and the desert floor. What happened next would become the subject of extensive debate and investigation. A beam of pale blue light suddenly projected downward from the cloud center, striking the desert floor and creating a perfect circle of illumination approximately 100 feet in diameter. Within this circle, the desert landscape appeared to transform, with vegetation and rock formations seeming to shift and rearrange themselves in ways that defied natural processes. Kyle made the decision to retreat, ordering his colleagues to pack the essential equipment and prepare to leave the area immediately. As they worked, they noticed something approaching from the direction of the light beam. A figure that appeared human but moved with an unnatural smoothness, never touching the ground but floating several inches above the desert floor. The figure was tall and slender, dressed in what appeared to be a form-fitting suit that reflected the colors of the surrounding phenomenon. It moved toward them with a steady, deliberate pace, covering the 2-mile distance with impossible speed. "We need to go now," Kyle said, his voice tight with urgency as he threw equipment into the back of their vehicle. The team's retreat became frantic as the figure continued to approach, showing no signs of slowing despite the distance it had covered. The escape from the desert valley was chaotic and terrifying. As they drove away, the team could see the cloud formation beginning to dissipate. though the central structure and the beam of light remained visible. The figure that had approached them stopped at the edge of the illuminated circle, watching them depart with an posture that suggested observation rather than pursuit. The vehicle's equipment continued to record anomalous readings as they fled, with the electromagnetic fluctuations gradually diminishing as they put distance between themselves and the phenomenon. It wasn't until they were nearly 20 miles away that they felt safe enough to stop and assess what they had witnessed and documented. The three sat in silence for several minutes, the reality of what they had experienced slowly sinking in. The aftermath of the encounter would prove nearly as strange as the event itself. When the team returned to the university and presented their data to Dr. Reed and other faculty members, they were met with a mixture of excitement and skepticism. The visual evidence was compelling but difficult to analyze, as many of the images and recordings showed distortions that couldn't be explained by equipment malfunction. The scientific data was even more puzzling, with readings that suggested phenomena beyond current understanding of atmospheric physics and energy dynamics. What happened next surprised the team. Representatives from various government agencies arrived to examine their findings, some identifying themselves as meteorological researchers, while others were more vague about their affiliations and interests. The University of Arizona ultimately conducted an internal investigation of the incident, with Dr. Reed defending her students' credibility and the authenticity of their data. The official report, released 6 months later, documented the unusual atmospheric readings and visual evidence, but concluded that the phenomenon was a rare but naturally occurring meteorological event not previously documented in scientific literature. Privately, however, Dr. Reed and the students maintained that what they had witnessed went far beyond any natural weather pattern. The specific location where the event occurred was never publicly identified in the report, though the team had recorded precise GPS coordinates. When Kyle later attempted to revisit the site with additional equipment, he found that the area had been fenced off with posted signs indicating government property and warning against trespass. The official explanation was that the land had been acquired for a wildlife preservation project, though no such project appeared in any public records. No further explanation for what the team witnessed that September day was ever provided, though their experience would influence their research and perspectives for the rest of their careers. The desert kept its secrets, as it always has, leaving only questions and impossible data as evidence of what had occurred in that remote valley. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable, particularly in the desert regions where the horizon seems to extend indefinitely, and the silence between communities can stretch for miles. These 7 accounts, drawn from official reports and first-hand testimony, represent only a fraction of the strange encounters that have occurred along the desert highways of the Southwest. Each story shares common elements with the others: isolation, unusual phenomena, encounters that defy conventional explanation. Yet each remains unique in its specific details and the impact it had on those who experienced it. What connects these disparate events is not just geography, but the sense that the desert itself is something more than barren land, that it might be a threshold to places and possibilities we cannot yet comprehend. The desert has long been a place of transformation in human consciousness, a landscape that strips away pretense and reveals what lies beneath. In the vast emptiness between scattered communities, the boundaries between reality and something else seem to blur, allowing for phenomena that cannot be easily categorized or explained away. The trucker who encountered the mysterious voice on his radio, the family that took a wrong turn into what seemed like another reality, the highway patrol officer who heard impossible sounds from an empty trunk. Each of these individuals experienced something that challenged their fundamental understanding of the world. Their accounts, verified through official documentation and cross-referenced with similar reports, suggests that there are aspects of the desert environment that remain beyond our current scientific understanding. What is perhaps most unsettling about these stories is not what they reveal about the desert itself, but what they suggest about the limitations of human perception and knowledge. The maintenance worker who discovered the disturbing recording, the engineer who witnessed impossible aerial maneuvers, the graduate student who picked up a hitchhiker who shouldn't exist. Each of these individuals was forced to confront the inadequacy of their existing frameworks for understanding reality. In the vast, ancient landscape of the American desert, modern humans, with all their technology and scientific knowledge, sometimes encounter phenomena that remind us how much we still don't know about the world we inhabit. The desert, with its extreme conditions and apparent emptiness, seems to be a place where the usual rules of reality sometimes bend or break entirely. The silence of the desert landscape is not merely an absence of sound, but a presence in itself, a quality that those who spend time there come to recognize and respect. In this silence, sounds take on new significance. Lights become more than just visual phenomena. And the isolation that characterizes much of the desert highway experience creates conditions where unusual encounters become possible. The storm chasers, who documented impossible weather patterns. The campers who experienced something beyond their scientific understanding. Each of these groups found that the desert environment could produce phenomena that defied explanation, even by trained observers with specialized equipment. The desert seems to operate according to principles that we have not yet discovered, revealing itself only occasionally and never completely to human observers. What these stories share, beyond their geographical setting, is the lasting impact they had on those who experienced them. None of the individuals whose accounts we've explored tonight came away unchanged by their encounters with the unexplained. The trucker who avoided certain routes, the family that never again took remote roads, the highway patrol officer who transferred to a different division. Each of these people made practical changes to their lives based on what they had experienced. Even the scientists and researchers whose training prepared them to approach unusual phenomena with skepticism and methodological rigor found that their desert encounters influenced their work and their worldviews in fundamental ways. The desert seems to leave its mark on those who witness its stranger aspects, imprinting them with knowledge or awareness that cannot be easily integrated into ordinary life. The American desert highways, with their endless miles of asphalt connecting isolated communities, continue to be the setting for unusual encounters and unexplained phenomena. Each year, new reports are filed, new testimonies recorded, new mysteries added to the growing collection of strange occurrences that characterize these remote regions. What connects these incidents across time and geography remains unclear. Whether they represent aspects of the natural environment not yet understood by science, encounters with phenomena from outside our conventional reality, or something else entirely. What is certain is that the desert will continue to be a place where the unexpected occurs, where the boundaries between known and unknown, natural and supernatural, reality and imagination become blurred in the shimmering heat and endless silence. If you or someone you know has a true story to share, leave it in the comments below. Our understanding of these phenomena grows with each account, each piece of evidence, each testimony that adds to the larger pattern of unexplained experiences in the American desert. The stories we've explored tonight represent only a fraction of what has been witnessed and documented along these lonely highways, waiting for explanations that may never come or that may emerge from unexpected directions in the future. The desert keeps its secrets, as it has for millennia, but occasionally it reveals glimpses of mysteries that remind us how much we still have to learn about the world we inhabit. Thank you for watching Snowbound Screams. Until next time, stay safe out there.